Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's so good to see you. I hope you're having a happy day wherever you are. Today is Meet the Etiquette Expert, and my special guest today is Jay Remer. He is from Canada, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about Jay. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, but I will say that he is one of the few etiquette experts in the entire world who is a man. And when we think of etiquette, we oftentimes don't think about men being etiquette experts, but they are becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on. And he was one of the very first male men to become certified in business etiquette, and he has a wonderful website. It's etiquetteguy.com. We'll talk about his upcoming projects. We'll be talking about his interests. We'll be talking about some myths that maybe Americans have when it comes to meeting Canadians. So I'm going to bring him on in just a second. And here he comes.
Hello, Jacqueline.
Hello, Jay.
How lovely to see you. It's so nice to meet you after all these years. We've never met before.
I know, but we've talked an awful lot over the internet, and we've emailed each other.
Yes, indeed.
So, I'm really excited to just dive into the interview. And first and foremost, tell everybody where you live in Canada.
I live in St. Andrews by the Sea, and it's in the province of New Brunswick, which is in eastern Canada, and it's actually east of Maine. And we border Maine. It's one of our borders, and we are in a very protected area. And touch wood, we've had no COVID incidents down here at all. And we have had a spike recently in the province, which has been terrible, but it has not come down here. We're at the very end of a long peninsula. And I've been living here for about 25 years. I moved up here from New York, and I'm originally from Wilmington, Delaware, but I was schooled in Delaware and then Connecticut and Colorado, and then I took my first job in New York City at Sotheby's. And I worked there for about 3 or 4 years, and then returned to Wilmington and set up my own business for appraisals in fine arts, and carried on doing that for quite some time until I moved to Canada and purchased an old Georgian falling down sea captain's house and spent 2.5 years with my partner restoring it. And we ran it for about 7 years as a bed and breakfast. And it was one of the top bed and breakfasts in Canada, and one of only 3 18th century ones in the whole country. So we did that until the recession came in 2008. And simultaneous with that, other life events occurred, as they are wont to do. But I wound up going down to Washington and studied with Pam Eyring at the Protocol School of Washington, and have since made great friends with Dorothea Johnson, who founded the school. And I was the only man, oddly enough, in the class. And so Dorothea she now calls me Olive, because she refers to me as the olive in the martini, because I was the only one. And so at any rate, to this day, I'm Olive to Dorothea Johnson, and who is, by the way, doing great in retirement in Maine. So she's a super gal. At any rate, that was about 10 years ago, or no, 12 years ago. And so then I set up teaching etiquette, which in the remote area where I live is not the most sought after skill, but I picked away at it and started writing a column for the local newspaper, the regional newspaper, and I have just This Saturday, we'll be coming out with column number 582.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I also thought, well, why not have a television show? So I knew a guy who was on the board of the local television station, and I sent him a note and said, what do you think about me doing an etiquette show? And he said, great. So off I went, and that was maybe about 8 or 9 or 10 years ago. And I've done, I don't know, 100 or so television shows talking about all different kinds of etiquette. So, but as time goes on, and I tend to be mostly in the communication field, there's only so many times that you can tell people how to set a table or how to eat correctly or, what to do. So I've expanded my field to incorporate all of civility, and which is a much broader topic, and it's something that is so desperately needed in business today and in our own personal lives. And with the onset of COVID, it has just all the warts have just gotten bigger, and people are more depressed and they're out of sorts and they don't know what to do. And fortunately, I've had the privilege of having an absolutely superb psychotherapists that I've worked with for, a number of years now, like 12 or 13. And I've learned a tremendous amount about how we as human beings function, me particularly, but all of us in general. And so I started putting together a book called The Six Pillars of Civility, which thankfully, finally, is in the hands of an editor right now, and will hopefully be in your hands in the early spring.
Well, I would love that. And it sounds like you certainly haven't run out of topics, but I have to agree with you. When people think of etiquette, they normally think of knives and forks, but it is so much more than that, isn't it?
It is. It's about how you live your life, and it's about how you deal with emotions, and it's about how you interact with other people, because we are so interdependent. And people today, because of this culture of fear that we live in, which is only exacerbated by the COVID virus, but even before that, I've worked very closely with a gentleman who has introduced me to the Yale School of Emotional Intelligence, and he and they and Mental Health America have done some significant studies looking at how people feel in business. And people, 75% of people do not trust their coworkers or their bosses if something goes wrong. That, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of explanation on that, but I will say that it contributes to the epidemic of loneliness that is enveloping North America, and it has led to this vicious sort of toxic rhetoric that has infiltrated the media and social media as well. And it's a big problem. And it's a problem that I'm very curious about. And so I'm investigating a lot about it. And human dynamics are an important part of it. And the thing about etiquette is that it is something that we have control over for ourselves. How we comport ourselves is something we have control over. And it's important for us to be aware of all of these things, and how to incorporate them into our lives in a comfortable, easy way. And I've found that, by example, people around me tend to, when they're around me at least, tend to calm down and focus on things that are of importance, and not so much of the gossip that has really dominated the workforce today, and social media, and the amount of misinformation and everything. It's frightening. We are living in very frightening times right now. And etiquette has always been sort of thought of as a soft skill. It's not a soft skill. It's a critically important hard skill that requires education and practice.
Well, you're really diving into the psychology of human behavior, which I think also goes hand in hand with etiquette. And I think those of us who have chosen this as a career and we've done it a certain amount of years, like you and I have, you have to go deeper because frankly, if you just concentrate on knives and forks and tea sets and handshakes, I mean, you'll get bored very quickly. But I really applaud you for the research that you're doing and the book that you're writing about civility, especially during these changing, uncertain times.
Well, thank you. It is important. You know, Jackie, when I teach etiquette, whether it's to the youth or whether it's to their parents or whoever it might be, even a group of businessmen who are dragged into these classes, kicking and screaming, I find that. And I don't know, I don't study how other etiquette teachers operate. I mean, I'm very close to several in the world, and, uh, but I'm not. My technique, however, is that with every rule or guideline of etiquette, which has to be fluid and flexible, there has to be an explanation and a reason that is practical and understandable by the general public. Otherwise, they're not going to practice it. And a lot of times people wonder, why do we bother with? And I explain to people that we bother with learning etiquette because it makes us feel much more comfortable in settings that we may not be totally familiar with. So, for example, if you're going for a business interview, that's the big one that everybody goes to, you know, lunch with the boss or the potential boss. If you know what you're doing, you don't have to be worrying about that. And you can be focusing on what the person that you're speaking with has to say and the questions that they're asking. If you're worried about whether or not you're using your knife and fork right, you're not paying attention to the questions. So I find that it's very important to teach people why this stuff is important, because it is critically important, and it's what is holding the world together as it is now. If you look at the top diplomats in the world, the heads of state and all that, if they didn't have etiquette and follow certain protocol rules, the place would be a shambles. And I know that in the United States, clearly, the protocol office, advice from the protocol office in the White House is ignored. And I find it to be disturbing and irritating, obviously. And it's a shame, really, because the example that comes from the White House is so historically revered by the citizenry of the United States. And to see it go down the tubes, putting it politely, with this administration is just completely shocking and horrifying. And I hope that it doesn't lead the rest of the world down that dreadful path, and that people can appreciate the value of grace and good manners. It's respecting one another, and it's something I think inherently we as human beings want.
Mm-hmm. And I always say you can't be responsible for someone else's behavior, but you can be responsible for the way in which you behave around other people, because you're always going to have people who are rude and insensitive. And the other thing that I teach in my classes is that etiquette is situational. And you mentioned flexible, and it's always flowing. And I couldn't agree with you more, because etiquette is situational, and what might work for you living in Canada might not work for me, and so on and so forth. So I want to transition into something a little bit more lighthearted and talk about talk about the myths that Americans have about Canadians. I mean, when I talk to some people, I mean, first and foremost, I don't think a lot of American here in the US have explored Canada. They haven't been to Canada. And so I just want you, from your bird's eye view, to share with me what you've learned about the misnomers about.
Well, when I went to school, now mind you, I went to school a long time ago, and we did not study anything about Canada. Uh, when I left, I mean, like until I got here, Canada was, populated by Eskimos, which of course we don't use that word even anymore. Um,
Oh,
and
heaven forbid.
and people lived in igloos. Well, that just is absolutely not true. Canada is a fabulous country. It has 1/10 the population of the United States, and most of it lives right along the border with the United States. Canadians are known as being polite. If you have a Canadian passport and an American passport, use the Canadian passport when you're going overseas. It gets a better reception. I don't have a Canadian passport, so I just have to bluff my way through. But Canadians are very much like Americans. We have up here the system of law and government are different. Everything else is pretty much the same. And the food, like I eat regular food like everybody else does, but we have special things up here. Like we have fiddlehead ferns and we have cod cheeks and we have things that you don't eat in the US because they're either too scarce or why would you? Because you have plenty of things to eat down there. But I would say that there are Canadians are a jolly, friendly bunch of people. We have the same struggles and challenges that people in North America have with systemic racism and all of that. It's just not so much with Black people as it is with the Native indigenous people that were here to begin with, and now with a lot of immigrants. And Canada is much more welcoming at this particular point in time to immigration than the United States, because Canada has a shrinking population. And we need more people. So at any rate, there's Canada is a wonderful, wonderful, safe country to live in. It's one of the friendliest countries in the world, according to one of those magazines that tells you what the most fun countries to live in are. And it is, so I'm very comfortable here. I'm glad I'm here and not in the United States right now. And so if there are any specific myths that anybody would like to have me address, I'm happy to. But oddly enough, Canadians and Americans are very, very similar.
I agree.
Now, in the province that I live in, it's a bilingual province. So there is a French influence in certain parts of the province, much stronger in certain parts of the province. And my experience is that actually not that many people are bilingual. If you want a job with the government, in theory, you're supposed to be bilingual. But the French that they speak up here is very, it's not Parisian French. It's their own Canadian French, and it's difficult to understand if you were raised with Parisian French. Anyway, Canada is it's a great neighbor because we do speak the same language and we do have the same general way of going as far as respecting one another.
Well, I was going to ask you, you had mentioned that Canadians are friendly. So do you find the etiquette business, do you find that it's not needed there in Canada, or?
No. No, as a matter of fact, Jacqueline, the government, last year I went to a weekend-long conference that was sponsored by the government. So I was invited, along with maybe 20 other people, to try to come up with what does this mean? What is etiquette and civility, and how can we incorporate it into organizations and businesses? And they were, of course, concerned about the Canadian, the government and its various arms itself. We came up with an awful lot of great ideas and topics, and the thing was promptly dropped for who knows why. But I still feel there's no question that etiquette is important at all times. And even to this day, I get people who call me and say, could you come and teach my children how to do this, that, or the other thing? And I say, well, what about why can't you teach them?
That I get the same thing. And I said, well, I will. And that's why I developed a home study course for parents who want to teach their children etiquette, because I believe it starts at home.
Well, it starts at home, and the problem is that we've had a couple of generations that didn't get taught how to behave properly. And so the parents and the grandparents don't even know how to do it properly. And I can go, and it's not a particular demographic that knows or doesn't know these things. I've dealt with all demographics, and I'm shocked at the number of people who come from very, privileged backgrounds who have terrible table. So still very important right across the board, and I think that it always will be, because it's something that you have to learn. It isn't something that you come up with instinctively.
Oh, I agree. Etiquette has to be learned. Manners have to be learned. It's not something you come out of the womb doing. And you're exactly right with that. Speaking of childhood, I know a little bit about your background, but I am interested in learning a little bit more about your family and your upbringing. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Well, I was clever picking my parents, and I was born into a very privileged family, the DuPont family in Wilmington, Delaware, the ancestral home of which is behind me to that side. And so I was raised in a very strict and guarded way. We were kept. We just didn't have a full understanding of the way the world worked at all. We lived in a very much of a bubble, and I told one person not long ago, because we're dealing with this whole racism thing around the world right now, and I said, I never went to school with anyone other than a white guy until I went to boarding school, and that's where I made friends with the first Black people. Mm-hmm. And it suddenly occurred to me, like, well, what in the world kind of a world have I been living in? Mm-hmm. And as I have grown to understand more the everybody thinks that you're raised with a silver spoon. Well, I was raised with a gold spoon, and I had a terrible childhood, I will admit. Oh, and it's one of the reasons why I've spent 40 years in psychotherapy. Wow. So I think that it's very important for people to understand that just because you may have come from a rich family doesn't mean that you're raised in a nice way. And I went to boarding school with a whole, teams of people who had the same challenges. And so I think that the point that I would make is that you can't really judge a book by the cover. And I must say that with privilege comes a lot of great things, like a good education. And I had a chance to travel the world before it got shut down, with the 9/11. And so I have a curiosity, and I have a compassion for all people. And so I cringe at some of the things that goes on, at the company these days. You have to move on, though, and make a life for yourself. And I very much am grateful for my family and my upbringing. There's nothing I can do about it. I mean, there it is. But I think that I rarely talk about it. I rarely talk about the privilege end of it, because I don't think that there's anything to gain by me talking about that, or by anybody listening to it. I think I would think would be very boring for some people. Although I find that it's one of those things that makes for lots of good gossip. So you're constantly going around and correcting people. But
Well,
I
needless to say, you're not going to be writing a memoir, are you?
well, as a matter of fact, I am going to be writing an autobiography on my childhood. Uh,
Wow,
which
really?
Yeah, because I think it's important, because I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of people have had challenging childhoods, and my former partner has just started a company in Troy, New York, that deals with that very subject of how a single word can change a child's life, and it can either be a great word, or it could be a terrible word, but it can be very powerful.
Mhm.
And so his company, by the way, is called Everything You Are, and it's an apparel company, and it's fabulous. And I think that it's very important for people to really, during these times
Mhm.
of COVID, and I know we have to kind of wrap up,
Mhm.
I think it's very important to take the time to do self-reflection. So
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of writing about that, and I'm doing a television show right now, a 26 episode television show with Andrew Foss, who is my mentor and one of my mentors. And we are sort of doing the ABCs of building character. And
Wow.
it's especially about leadership. And all of the episodes are on Facebook and YouTube and all the rest of it. So it's not like you have to come to Canada to see me. But I think it's very important for people to become more aware of themselves, because that way they gain emotional intelligence. And when they gain emotional intelligence, they can live more fulfilling lives, and they can be so much more helpful in helping other people live fulfilling lives.
I totally agree. And that's what I would love to leave our viewers with, is that bit of advice. Is self-reflection is so important. I don't know if you know, but I was in India back in November, and I traveled to an ashram, and I attended an executive retreat for a week. And it was very similar. The Swami said something very similar, that it is our intellect that we must develop in order to be not only better to ourselves, but better for other people as well. And that goes along with the self-reflection, what you're talking about, especially during these changing times.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, for inviting me today. The show, by the way, is called Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Foss, for anybody who might be interested in Googling it, or whatever you do these days to find information. But
Yes,
follow the
and
golden rule.
I would love to put that in the show notes. Follow is that if
It's,
you can.
I can send you I can send it to you, or his name is Andrew Foss, Faas. So Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Foss, and we've done 13 episodes. We've got 13 more to go.
Okay, FAAS. Okay,
Right.
I'm going to hit send. And of course, we will put this in the comments too. So everybody will have access to this. I think it's fascinating. And I really applaud you for all the good work you're doing, and the friendship that we've had over the years. I cannot wait to meet you in person when life, uh, I don't know if we call it normal, if it ever gets back to normal, but a new normal,
That's right.
when we can travel again.
Yes, indeed. So, yes, I look forward to I've got so many friends in Florida that I miss, and I'm just I'll be looking forward to seeing them, hopefully within a year.
Oh, I hope so too, Jay. So thanks everybody for watching. I am so happy that I'm starting to get some viewers to tune in and pay more attention to the world of etiquette, because when I started in 25 years ago, there were only a handful of us doing this. And now it seems like there are hundreds and hundreds of us compared to what I see based on what I see on Instagram.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right.
I guess anybody can have a shingle.
I'll tell you one funny little story before we go. When I started teaching etiquette, a friend of mine sent me an article from the Montreal Gazette, and it said, Britain's youngest etiquette expert. And it was William Hanson, and he was 18 years old at the time. I found him on social media and connected with him, and we've been close friends ever since. So there's two of us at least.
I know you are, and I have interviewed William, and he's a marvelous guest and such a nice human being.
He's a lovely guy.
He really is. He is. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I look forward to seeing everybody again for my next Facebook Live interview. Thank you. And thank you, Jay.
Thank you.